Hello everybody and welcome back to Writing the Rapids, the show where I, Joe Bielecki, talk to writers about writing, and very often those writers have been recommended to me by writers who have previously been on the show, or it's a Rejoinder episode, which this is. I'm once again talking to Shane Jesse Christmas, this time about the re-release of his book Yeezus in Furs, out this time through Modern Alchemy. Before we get into my conversation with Shane, let's remind you that you can help out the show by giving me $2 a month over at patreon.com/noisemakerjoe. Get these episodes a little bit earlier than everybody else. If money is not in the cards for you, that's totally fine. Like, comment, and subscribe. Tell 2 friends about the show, and blog about it, post about it, put it in your newsletter, that sort of thing. Now, without further ado, let's get into my conversation with Shane. Yeezus in Furs is, I don't know, would you call it a second edition, or would you call it a reprint?
I'd probably say reprint. Because nothing changed in the text. It wasn't like,
okay.
Like I changed the text. But there is obviously the introduction by Thomas More and I guess the afterword by myself. So, so there is differences from the first one, but not in the text. I didn't really look at the text. Except to sort of cursory look and to sort of function in some way with the afterword. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Which kind of goes right into like the first kind of deep thing I wanted to get into, which is what's your relationship with the book now versus when you wrote it versus when it first came out?
Yeah. Good question. I'm not exactly sure. It's not really defined. Like, I don't have a very definitive, with distance, the book means this or the book means that. And I didn't really want to try and write the afterword in such a way where it's placed in a moment in time, even though that's sort of, you can't sort of get away from that. Mm-hmm. I do have a natural sort of more visceral response, which is it feels really removed. And this probably might sound a little bit full of myself or whatever, but I was kind of like, I don't really recognize the book in terms of writing it, or that's a bit hard to explain, but I think writers have this thing where they sort of, well, I certainly do. I've heard other writers talk about this, where you write something, and pretty much as soon as you've written it, it's you're creating the next thing, or you're sort of already thinking about the next thing. And when it comes time to sort of think about things that you've written, it's I wouldn't say I struggle with it, but I just sort of it's not really a place I go to. But I did kind of think it's. I was like, it's pretty good. I was kind of like, oh, I like that book. I do recognize it's a lot going on in the book, probably less so than the books I'm writing now. Probably people would disagree, but it's definitely sort of throw a lot into the, into the text. Whereas I certainly still do that, but it was sort of, it's a lot more anxiety inducing, I think, and a lot more throwing sort of sci-fi images and high level delirious sort of things at people. So in a very repetitive and relentless way, probably less so now. I've sort of probably, let's say, refined or chilled out a little bit, and so it's definitely there's there, but I do like that book, and that's sort of what the afterword sort of hints on, which is there's a novel before that, there's 2 novels before that, and one I sort of don't particularly like, but there's sort of, I always kind of go Police Force as a Corrupt Breeze, the book that came out before that. They're sort of pretty written pretty much one after the other, and I quite liked them. They're you know, like I liked writing them. I was kind of like, that's the first kind of where I was like, I'm writing. Not that I wasn't like I'm writing something amazing. It was just more I'm writing something that's me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was kind of like I found my thing. Yeah, and that's sort of what the unlearning stuff in the afterward touches on. Yeah, so that's sort of that's my relation to it's like I was like, this is the start of me sort of nutting out what I want to say. Yeah, that's probably it's probably too highfalutin. But like how I want to write, like and things like that. I've sort of just everything crystallized in one sort of almost perfect period, and then you sort of go, okay, that's it. I'll do different things as I go along, which is have different ideas about books. There's one book where I've gone, this is going to be like a romance book, but that comes out however it is. So I was kind of like, it was kind of an interesting period, and it's very probably more than any other book. It is definitely a book that's definitely a collage of things that I was sort of writing in terms of, I think your earlier stuff, there's that thing where you're sort of writing short pieces and you put them together and try and put a through line through it all. Yeah. It's definitely a book like that. Also, because it came out with Dostoevsky Wannabe, sorry, just cut you off.
No.
I was kind of because they had a really good structure where it's like, we'll publish your book. They'll say yes, but you sort of have to lay it out, and they'll design the cover and things like that. They'll really help you. So I was kind of very adamant in seeing the books as a bit of a stepping stone. But now in hindsight, I'm kind of like, they're not. They're actually like pretty foundational for me as a writer. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah, I always thought their various like options for how they do things was interesting. Where it was like, we'll do everything but no royalties, or we'll like take care of production and you can do everything else and then you take the royalties.
Yeah.
I think they got more granular as time went on too. And it's been a while.
They did. They started sort of going up, they're going to do ideas for their own sort of various anthologies, and they did ones based on city, and then they did some other things. So they started stuff that they wanted to put out. I did 3 books with them, and I think did both options.
Okay.
And it was one of those things where it's like, I've got a book. How do you get a book published? And I was looking at, you just sort of start looking at where people that you're reading or people you like or people that are sort of writing. And I stumbled across Dostoevsky Wannabe, and I was like, well, it sounds like it's an easy thing if they like what you write, right? And so, I did take it as a bit of a, this is a good way to build an audience, but also I would totally appreciate that model. Some people would just be like, that's not on. That feels almost like vanity publishing or something like that, but it's not. Yeah, I could see. Yeah, so
yeah, for sure. It's an interesting thing, and like, it's certainly like looking at their catalog at the time, back when I was trying to get Tired published, like it was, it felt legitimate. It felt curated.
Oh, absolutely,
to an extent, right?
Yeah.
It was definitely not like a book mill or anything. Going back to what you were talking about, like kind of initially thinking about your early books as a stepping stone, and how they've sort of, I don't know, refined or become, I don't know. I'll kind of elucidate what I'm saying by telling a little story. I was working on a television show, and we were filming this older watercolor painter. He'd had a long career, had been, supporting himself with his art for decades or whatever. And he was talking about he had a bunch of old paintings out, and then he like did a new painting for us as we were interviewing him, and he was talking about how he had been using less and less color throughout his career, and you could tell that his very early paintings were very vibrant and very bright, and then his more contemporary paintings were like winter scenes and browns and grays and stuff. And he sort of was like, I don't know why I'm doing it. Art critics who look at my work say my work is maturing because it's using less. And he kind of, I don't know, he was a crotchety old painter man, so you can imagine how he might have felt about people talking about his work that way. But it was, it's one of those things where for someone kind of just getting started in their 20s listening to an older person talk, it's just one of those things that like stuck in my craw, that like as you get older it sort of gets less, I don't know, noisy. And I was trying to think about like the books of yours that I've read and trying to like see where if there was like a fulcrum, like where's the shift between this like very like staccato, very collage-y stuff and your newer stuff that feels, they're your books clearly, but like, yeah, you can, I guess if you have a link to the author, you can tell like, okay, this one is more
sure.
This one's the romance, this one's the science fiction novel, that sort of thing.
Well, do you know which one's the romance one?
We had talked about it, and I can't remember which one it was.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say no. Was it not the sex shops of Sherman Oaks? That's what I.
Yeah. Okay. Do you see? Can you? Oh, well, I can talk about that actually.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think after Belfie Hell, I was like,
I was right. That's the fulcrum point. Yes.
Yeah, that feels like just everything. I mean, because Belfie Hell has a cast of thousands.
Mm-hmm.
And then Sex Shops Sherman Oaks just has 2 people, and then pretty much from then on, most of them have 2 people, and it was kind of like, well, that sounds like something. Because you talk about writers have. In some ways, sometimes writing is just, I have all these obsessions that I'm interested in that I just want to sort of unpack, and not because of, something that's not something that, not therapy substitute, but like, I was just kind of like really interested in that idea of just, okay, well, and not even this thing of like, well, Belfie had a cast of thousands, so why don't I just reduce it now just to 2 people and see if you can do that? It was more. But that was an idea. But I think I just sort of became interested in trying to extract some sort of tenderness from all that chaos. So a way to do that is just have 2 people that are talking or dealing with each other's sort of in a relationship of some description, and that's how, so that's how that sort of played out. But again, I sort of felt, especially after sort of Sex Shops, Meth, Latex, Texas, that I'm kind of like, maybe I've not that I've run that race, but like, and not to flip it back the other way, which is like, let's have a cast of thousands. Although I am thinking about that, that might be a way to, it's just kind of like, you have like ebbs and flows, I think, in terms of how you want to approach it. And definitely, and Yeezus and Furs was, for some reason, I have this thing where, especially around those books, I was like, read a lot of non-fiction. Especially when I write a book, I'll read a lot of non-fiction in the lead up to a book about a certain thing or a couple of different things. And look, at the time, I was just kind of. I don't care either way, really, in terms of what I was in this thing, but I was reading it more in terms of trying to get some tropes for science fiction. So I was reading a lot of like university papers on like transhumanism. And that's because that I thought that was an interesting sort of skeletal construct for those books. And then I just sort of blew my brains apart just with too much information. So maybe I also wanted to just reduce it down to just two people.
Yeah. I think as a writer, especially like someone who writes as much as you have a lot of books out. I think you can like completely exercise those notions. Where I think writers who write more slowly, for whatever reason, otherwise like stick within certain themes. I don't want to stand by that too hard. That's more of a ponderance than anything else.
I think there's a truth there where you're talking about. I heard I heard an interview with a musician recently, and they were saying, I looked, the last couple of songs that you're sort of writing on an album are sort of really the first couple of songs for your next album. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like there's been books where I've just sort of finished and then I'll have a break. But then 2 weeks later, I just start writing again. So, and it's so, I can see, so some of them, they're not necessarily sequels, but yeah, there's definitely things going on there that I could appreciate. Yeah, like the end of the book is sort of the start of the next book in some way. But yeah.
I want to talk about the title because I looked up Venus and Furs again. I watched one of the movie adaptations. Haven't read the book. At some point last year, I read a book called Counter Pleasures, which is about like it looked at masochism and sadism in literature, and then kind of how the terms have changed and whatever. Anyway, she was talking about Masoch a lot. So I'm like, yeah. Between that and the movie years ago and then the Wikipedia article for Venus and Furs, I was kind of like, okay, yes, I have this kind of comfortable Spark Notes version of like what is being referenced there. As I was reading the book, Kanye reappeared from under his hole with a sort of like apparently heartfelt letter of like, hey, sorry for being really racist the past couple of years,
his
guys.
Apology. Yeah.
And so the idea, like the, I don't know, ideas or images that Yeezus and Furs evokes is interesting to me, especially given the content. And this is all rolling back around to my sort of like fascination with an Australian guy writing, if not about America, writing using the language of America, or at least the language of America from someone who's not within it. And I guess maybe like this idea like that I have like several different things layered on top of each other, and I'm trying to organize them. The title Yeezus and Furs kind of evokes this like we are being made to be submissives to mass culture, to the sort of like American culture machine, which is an extension of, or even not extension, just part of the American war machine, and that we're all sort of like buried under it. which of course works with the collaginess of the story, where it is just like you're constantly being hammered with a bunch of different things. In his foreword, Thomas talks about how it's amazing this book was written before the pandemic. And there's really no question there. The only question kind of with regard to, you know, writing about America is like a sort of, is this really how we look?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's fine. Like, you know, I guess what it is, it's weird to be an American, to be talking to someone who is, you know, kind of also within the imperial core, but, you know, not the epicenter of it. And to be like, because I know a whole bunch.
I won't sugarcoat it. You look deranged and psychotic, and the rest of the world doesn't think like this. That doesn't act like this.
That's amazing. That feels like so good to hear. It's someone has come into Plato's cave and is like, hey dog, that's just shadows on the wall there. There's a whole world out there. Because I imagine myself to be fairly unbrainwashed when it comes to America. You know, I'm an anarchist. I have left the country before. I know people who aren't part of the, you know, I know non-Americans and have talked to them. And like, but it, you know, like that Butthole Surfer song, you'll never know just how you look through other people's eyes. And so I guess that's why I continue to harp on this idea whenever I have you on, because it's like not confusing to me or surprising to me or anything that like this is how America looks, but I am kind of constantly fascinated by, like, you know, seeing. I'm trying to think of a good image.
But also, I mean, sorry, and you know, I know I was being a bit facetious, and I don't want flag waving in the comments against me or my effigy being burnt, but you know, like America does. I mean, this is the thing. Well, what's the fascination? I think I've spoken to you about before. I mean, everything that is culturally sort of, not everything, but there's some things that culturally loom large, and a lot of that is, you know, has become, you know, like movies, music, books. You know, it's you know, jazz. You know, it's all. There's all these things that have been contributed to the world that are like fascinating, and pop culture is a massive part of that. And then you have a very confusing sort of very angry political thing, but I always have. So I mean, even growing up, so I'm quite, you know, I'm older than most people, but like, yeah, I'm sort of probably a product of, you know, going through the 80s and 90s, and even then it's just kind of like it's very interesting, it's very compelling as well. So you're like, it's very compelling. I mean, anything that's going on in, you know, that happens, you know, there's people that are sort of political junkies, and, you know, I don't pay attention to politics that's really going on in any other country apart from myself, except America, because it does loom so large. And I'm not just, and this is not just a Trump thing, it always has, right? Like, it's quite fascinating like that. So there are lots of people that are like I said, political junkies, and just do follow the history of sort of everything, what's happened in the 50s, 40s, 60s, all that sort of stuff. So, and then movies, just, it all really comes from the States in some way. And rightly or wrongly, I mean, you could sort of say you've hogged. In some ways, like we're just all. It seems like there's in the last 20 years there's been a big shift to music from Africa and uncovering all this amazing music, but it just wasn't. We just sort of because there's one story being told, and maybe the world could have been a bit different if one wasn't so massive in terms of the cultural impact. But yeah, I kind of like, I was being a bit silly, but people probably look at Australia and just go, again, a bit deranged and psychotic and crazy as well, right? And definitely would own that. Yeah, so but the title Yeezus infers, well, again, you talk about Kanye just popping up recently. Was it 2018? He was probably, I think Yeezus, the album, had just come out.
Mm-hmm.
Possibly. It feels like, 2018 is a different. Yeah, 2018 Kanye is significantly a bit more, again, someone looming large. He was probably around that time, he was everywhere, and rightly so, because the stuff that he was putting out was pretty mind-blowing. On lots of different levels. So there's that. I kind of always think titles sometimes are not points in time. They're just they're a reference point. They're a reference point for people to talk about in some way. So you need a title. Otherwise, everything would just be called Book 27 and Book 28 and things like that. But it just seemed to fit because that's what thinking. And I was kind of like, this is one of those things where it just popped into the head really quickly. Definitely had a thing at the end where I was like, I need a title for this thing, and it wasn't like I wrote down 50 titles and like and mulled over 20 of them and got it down to a 5 title wish list. It did just pop into my head and then went, that's the one. I'm not going to better that for a while. So and then all those, and the reason why it's not just because it's cute. It did some on the levels that you're talking about fit. It does talk about. It's got the reference to all the Masoch stuff. It's got the reference to currently sort of what's happening in that time and space in the world, and then it's got all those layers and repressions in terms of. It hints at a lot of different things like collapse and. But someone also commented. Thomas said it's amazing that it was written before the pandemic, but someone also said it speaks to sort of post or sort of war on terror times.
Mm-hmm.
That they felt that's how sort of them growing up, the paranoia or the delirium was very evident for them. It spoke to them about when they 2018 they were a teenager. It said it spoke to them in terms of that. So yeah,
it's hard to imagine people being teenagers in 2018, but whatever. I also just I love the sonically Yeezus infers is perfect. Like maybe I said this like during one of our previous, but like Xerox over Manhattan also is a title that like the way that the wordplay works feels exactly how my brain does things. So Xerox over Manhattan and Yeezus infers like also feel like something I would have
feels
said.
Like a good it feels like, especially Xerox, that feels like a good description of what that book is about. Mm-hmm. Like you're like, Could you describe what this book is? Well, it's about it. It's like it feels like it's a Xerox over about. But then that one's interesting because that one, it's kind of funny. There's a couple where they're clearly lines that are just from the book, and I was just I need a title, and then that jumped out, and then sex shops is Sherman Oaks. That's the same. That's a line in the book. I did. Someone once messaged me and said, "Oh, there's not much. The book's not really about sex shops as Sherman Oaks." Like, sort of a bit disappointed. Or then someone else also messaged me and said, similar, but asking me for my top 10 sex shops in Sherman Oaks, and I said, "Oh, look, I don't really have any." And then they proceeded to tell me this, which was interesting. I went in naturally. I was curious. I went and looked them up. It's like they seem to know what they're talking about. They seem to, So
that's fantastic. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on, is you talked about it in your afterword, and I think you had brought up the same quote of like, I write to figure out why I'm writing. And then you also brought up The Cloud of Unknowing, which was recommended to me by another writer. I forget exactly who. And like, I read it on his recommendation of like, read this as a way to inspire yourself in your writing. And I think I don't know. Maybe I connected with the book on the intended level more deeply than you did. But like, I like the idea of, trying to forget things at least for a moment for a purpose, right? Like The Cloud of Unknowing, I think, kind of persists because it aligns with Zen stuff. And so Christians can use it and be like, hey kid, don't stop going to church to go to the meditation group. Like, we got apophatic mysticism at home, kid. And but like, I find that the writing I do that is at least the most fun for me is when I am not thinking about anything other than like having fun writing.
Yeah, actually, just to circle back to your first thing about looking back, if you were thinking about, that you said there was a fulcrum point and all this sort of stuff, there's probably a bit there where now there's a lot more thought, perhaps planning, care put into them, and those books are sort of that Yeezus and Police Force are probably humming on a sort of really into it. I was whatever I was eating was good food because I was sort of humming on a very intuitive level and sort of and sometimes people when they're creating music or things like that, you have those special moments. Whereas now I'm kind of like this book, and I have this character, and I sort of fleshed it out like normal people do. And then, but for those books, I sort of was just like, I'm going to write. I got this idea, and it's all going to come together, and it's going to be pretty. At the end, it was like it doesn't, that's the book, and I sort of do that. That's the book. I'm sort of not. I edit, but I'm sort of I do edit, but those ones were sort of very well. That's they've hummed along at a very high intensity. I did. There was a period, you have this period where I'm just gonna obsess about a certain thing. I read this book. It's called Mysticism by Evelyn Underhill. It's kind of like the book, and it sort of talks about Western European, probably more Christian mysticism. And I was kind of like, oh, never what. And didn't think that was a thing because you just always hear Eastern mysticism, but clearly, Western was the one that was sort of rocking before, in the 60s, right? So and that's a really good book, and that just talks about very similar things like you're talking about. There's the noble path, and there's different paths to mysticism and things like that. And again, I'm not. If I think about writing, learning to write, like you write a million words before you become good at writing anything. And that idea of to become a good writer, you got to read a lot. That is true, but I think when you sort of if you sort of hit a point, I don't read a lot anymore. I do read a lot, but I'm not just. There was a period where I was doing less writing and reading more, because I wanted to sort of work out ideas and how to be a writer, and sort of so I was reading lots of different things about how to be a writer, not from a handbook, writing for beginners, but like reading a book to see how they constructed that sort of stuff. And now I sort of do less of that. I read for a bit more entertaining. So the unlearning part that I'm sort of talking about there is twofold. There was a period where I was like, I need to unlearn a lot of things in my life. I'm just becoming very overwhelmed, and so that stuff. But in terms of the writing stuff, that's what I'm sort of talking about there. It was like I've unlearned a lot of things, or I've pierced through something, which is I sort of get it now. I can write. I was talking about that's the first stuff where I was writing as me, and I was sort of unlearning a lot of. Wasn't thinking about it. I don't know. Sometimes when I've started to try to write a novel, you write, and then as you're writing it, you go back and edit it. And this is the first one where I was just like, I'm going to stick to just writing a certain amount, a block of, and I'm not going to look at it until I finished it, and then go back and look at it. I sort of was just sort of so consumed about I've got to write a novel that I was so paralyzed that I didn't get there. And then and then it just felt like that point where again you write the million words, and it was like, okay, I'm unshedding a lot of, and that a million words or whatever it is, you write in different styles, and you're sort of not yourself, and you write. It's kind of weird, this conversation about autofiction, which is, I was sort of trying to write like that in early 2000s, and I just and this is not to disparage. I know this is weird. This happens on Twitter a lot. There's this weird debate about autofiction that I don't really understand because I quite like it, but I just went, that's not for me, and I was kind of like almost like I don't want to reveal about anything. I don't want to talk about myself. I want to create worlds and things like that, and so I just kind of like you try all these different things, and that's what the unlearning is. I'm probably talking about there, but also there was an unlearning where my life sort of changed, and I used to get really angry about shit music. What I thought was shit music. This is an example, right? What I thought was a shit book or shit music, and I just became like, it's not for me. So that's what I talk about. I chilled out a lot in my, not being sort of a very hot-headed. Not that I'm an angry person or anything like that, but I was very. No, they're going to paint myself in a really bad way, but like opinionated or things like that about things. I was just like, okay, just like write the book, just be you, be kind to yourself, to be kind to yourself, and then write something. So, that's sort of what I'm sort of touching on there. Yeah.